Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
The Notorious Bettie Page is over. Adam and Eve were naked in the Garden of Eden, weren't they? When they sinned, they put on clothes.
Will you take a picture of me? It's silly. People take pictures of me all the time, but I don't know how to take one of myself.
She was the pinup queen of the universe.
I need you to lift your knee up. I'm seeing a little bit too much.
Can you bend over? Show us your kiss string.
Oh, you're so happy.
You never know how much I love you.
Her pictures captured the fantasies of a nation.
Takes all types to make a world. What kind of types?
I'd like this young lady to look very strict.
Lil Jon has some special outfits he'd like you to put on.
I'll say they're special.
Betty, do you understand what kind of man buys these pictures? Does it just make you sick to see guys like me grovel like this?
It's fine.
Don't you just want to crush us? Humiliate us? Punish us?
But for Bettie Page, life was more than just a pose.
Tell me, what do you think of all this tying up business?
Oh, I enjoy acting very much.
Has Mama said anything to you about my mother? Not a word.
What do you think Jesus would say about what you're doing now?
I hope that if he's unhappy with what I'm doing, he'll let me know somehow.
Picture House and HBO Films present the woman behind the pinups.
It's quite a treat to meet the Notorious Bettie Page. Send the next one in.
And the life behind.
Smile, Betty.
The Notorious Bettie Page.
Welcome to the Notorious Bettie Page. It's nice to have you here.
The next film and the last of this particular Mary Harron series. We're looking at her first 3 films, and this is the last one. 2005, 2006.
5-ish. 2006 adjacent.
Depending on who you listen to based on award releases, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Her third film, The Notorious Bettie Page. All about the Notorious Bettie Page. Fancy that.
Okay, 2 things. 1, had you seen the movie before?
Nope.
2, what did you know about Bettie Page, the real Bettie Page?
I didn't know anything about her life. All I knew is that she was a famous pinup girl from ages ago. But as I watched the film, came to realize a lot of my thoughts of who she was were incorrect, because I thought she was one of the women that, like, during the war, they were painting on the bombers and stuff like that. So I was a little off on my impressions. I think I had crossed
because she wasn't.
No, but she was a pinup girl, but that came a little later. Yes.
Yeah. I had high hopes for this movie, really high hopes. And that was before I even recognized that it was Gretchen Mol in the title role. And as you know, Andy, I'm a Gretchen Mol fan.
Are you?
Do you know that?
I didn't know that. And I was like, I know I've seen her before, because I definitely recognize her name, but she's one of those people where I was like, where do I know you from? Because I just don't know.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I know she's been in bit parts like Donnie Brasco, things like that, but I'm not sure of any big role.
The 13th Floor.
Which I know I saw, but I remember nothing about that.
It was so good. I think it might be a guilty pleasure of mine, but I love it. I love it. I love that movie. I love what it does to my brain.
7.1 at IMDb, so it can't be a guilty pleasure.
It's not a guilty pleasure.
Too many people love it. Yeah.
Noted. Too many people have been hornswoggled by that movie. I adore it, and I fell in love with Gretchen Mol in that movie, and I cannot believe that it took me, I don't know what I was thinking. I turned on this movie, and during the credits, I must have turned my head to take a sip of beverage and missed the fact that it was starring Gretchen Mol. I must have totally missed it, because it was a half hour. Half hour into the movie, and I'm like, gosh, she's really great. That whoever's playing Bettie Page, who's playing Bettie? Gretchen, what now? I mean, blown away by the fact that Gretchen Mol was in here. And I think, for me, there's the movie and there's Gretchen Mol in the title character, and then there's everything else. So, and I'm not even completely 100% exuberant about the character that she's playing, but I think I'll just lay it all out there. Gretchen Mol's performance in this movie is the reason to see this movie if you want to take the time to see this movie. There you go.
That sounds like what a lot of critics said about this film. They said that her performance was fantastic, that this, from reading about this film and everything, and Gretchen Mol's performance in it, I had forgotten, and maybe it's just because I didn't really remember her that much, but she was kind of a Hollywood it girl in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. She had been in a few roles where people thought, oh, she's really going to break into things and she's going to be that next person that you're going to see everywhere. But then it never really happened. I mean, she certainly is still performing and she's in a lot of things. She just never quite became like the next thing. But I mean, this certainly got a lot of buzz for her. But I don't know. It's just, I think there are a lot of things about this film that, as you're alluding to, it makes it not necessarily, a film worth watching, except to look at what Gretchen Mol is doing in it.
So I think we should start there, because it's really, I think that's an important way to talk about this film. We're doing the Mary Harron series, and I went into this looking for the Mary Harron stamp, right? And I think I got it. What attracted her to I Shot Andy Warhol and To American Psycho, these properties about, things that aren't safe to talk about, right? Things that are, they're not appropriate. It's not appropriate to do the kinds of things that, Patrick Bateman does in American Psycho. It's not appropriate to be such a radical feminist that you write a manifesto from the Society for Cutting Up Men. Like, those are things that are in many ways hard to approach cinematically, and she is interested in pushing on those buttons. And I think dealing with pornography in this time period is another one of those buttons that I have to imagine, sort of delights in pushing and approaching it in the way she did. And I think she has a delicate touch to it. I don't get the feeling that what she is doing here is to be so provocative as to state an opinion, but to present a case. The challenge I have with it is that she's so soft with it. It's almost soft-hearted. Like, the movie, in fact, comes away as like being a meal that I enjoyed and don't remember eating. It's just kind of vapor for me. And I just watched it less than 36 hours ago. And it's already, you mentioned the end, that you missed 5 minutes at the end because your DVD was busted up. I don't think I could tell you what you missed.
Well, luckily, some people on YouTube made it available for me, so I was at least able to watch it. But yeah, it's one of those things that I kind of was able to piece it together from what I saw before and after the gap that I had. But I think this Harron said this about the film, and I think this will speak to some of my issues with the film. She said, because she was interested in doing a story about Bettie Page. I think it was her stepmother, Mary Harron's stepmother, had been an actress, and she was actually had acted with Stanley Kubrick. She was, I think, discovered by Stanley Kubrick, acted in his first film, Fear and Desire. And that idea of kind of breaking into the industry inspired her from stories of her stepmother, inspired her to do this story, I think, just because of that angle. But what she said about Bettie Page specifically, she said clearly, Bettie is a very inspiring figure to young women because she had a strong independent streak. She did what she wanted to do, and she wasn't just doing it for men. But I think it's a huge mistake to think of her as a conscious feminist heroine. As far as I can see, she didn't have an agenda. She just followed her own path unconsciously. I don't think she thought of herself as a rebel in any way. She was kind of in her own world of dress up. And I think when I see the film,
does the movie succeed in delivering on that? Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that's what the film is delivering.
Yeah.
And, she said she saw Page as an unwitting feminist figure who represented a movement for women's sexual liberation. But we're getting just so much of this passive character of Bettie Page working through that particular story. And we're not really getting that movement for women's sexual liberation as kind of the other side of the story. It becomes such a passive biopic. And it's interesting. I enjoyed learning about Bettie Page and her life, but it also just felt like, okay, well, now I know a little something about Bettie Page, but where is this connecting to anything in the bigger picture? And that's where I think Mary Harron failed in her desire to put this together, is there wasn't that other side to actually make this passive character of Bettie Page working through this world, contrasting with everything. I mean, we see the contrast with like the Senate hearings and stuff like that, but that just felt like expected Senate investigations of porn in the 50s. Like it didn't take me anywhere.
That's the problem. And so speaking first to Bettie Page, I think you're absolutely right. What makes the thing a drama is when you have a character who is even an unwitting advocate for feminist, whatever the words you used, feminist sexual liberation, whatever. If she is intentional about her behavior, if she believes she is being somehow personally wronged in a way that can be extrapolated to a cultural wrong, and that she, through her actions, is able to turn the tide, right? But we don't get any of that. We get this, she's almost accidentally in the movie. Bettie Page, as a protagonist, is a bore. right? Gretchen Mol is fantastic in playing the character she was given, but the character is a snooze. Case in point, the big trial at the end. David Strathairn sitting up with his gavel. We get this, this is them taking to culture court, right, by way of litigating at this panel. Irving Klaw and Lily Taylor's Paula Klaw, his sister, sort of litigating their activities as selling pornography through the mail. And Bettie Page is literally sitting on a bench in the hall for 12 hours and never takes the stand. She is never called as a witness. That, to me, is the central sin of the third act of this movie, that it is all told by way of her sitting in court waiting, or sitting outside court waiting, and we never get the classic redemptive moment where she's on the stand. I don't care if that's the way it happened for real. I don't care by that point. It makes it not an interesting movie to watch.
Well, I think that they could have done it with her being out there and never getting a chance to come in and speak. But they would have had to come around it in a different way, where they actually made it feel like there was a whole other thing happening, and Bettie Page had become, unwittingly, as Mary Harron says, this kind of figure representing it that then they just discarded and didn't even consider to use. Like, that story wasn't there, but that also would have been more interesting than the way they did it. And I don't feel like when Mary Harron was putting this story together with Guinevere Turner, who she wrote American Psycho with, I just don't feel like they found the right approach to this particular biopic.
That is absolutely it for me. And that is where I struggle. I think centering the flashback narrative on her sitting in court and kind of reliving her life through that experience. I guess there is a case to be made that, anchoring her in court and flashing back to the rest of her life on how she got to that point, and then deflating the whole story there at the end is the sign of lack of progress. And maybe that is the punch we're supposed to take away from her experience there, that, look, I did all this and to wit, nothing. And I just don't feel like that made a good movie. I think you're right, finding a different way around. Or frankly, do we need the flashback architecture for this story?
Yeah, the flashback architecture was so frustrating. I want to go back to your point real quick and then come back to this flashback, because I feel like there's a point at the end when this is after she had found herself lost in this life that she was leading. She left it, went back to church, and then was basically on street corners, speaking the word of the Lord. And a guy comes up to her, a couple guys, and are talking to her like, "Aren't you the Notorious Bettie Page?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's not me anymore, blah, blah, blah." And that whole thing. Then there's that moment where she says something about her photos, or they're talking about, the being naked and all that stuff. And he's just like, "Well, no offense to you, but the pictures they're doing nowadays are a lot more graphic than they ever were with you." And I feel like that, I think, was the story that Mary Harron was trying to say here, that this was this character in this world and didn't have any clue what was really, she was a very naive girl, and I really enjoyed the way that kind of came across throughout, where she just never saw it as anything more than just taking silly pictures and stuff. But that's the story that we're not getting here, right? She never clues in to the fact that this is leading down a road of, stronger and stronger types of pornography, and it never, she's just never clued in. And even later, when she learns that, it never goes anywhere. And that's just, just following up on your point. That's another part of the story that it's just dropped in there, but it's not done in a way where it's like, oh, there was actually a change because of all this,
But you know what? So I 100% agree with you. I think that is one of the stories that I think could have been kind of leveled up in this movie, and not been so thin. The other one that I think is a massive missed opportunity is the conflict. And we should say the word in bold italics, the conflict that exists in Bettie Page that we see at the end when she's standing on the street corner preaching the word of the Lord is the central conflict that exists between that sort of the moral line she's been walking on the entire time to this. Like, if we're going to do a flashback, let's do a flashback from her, on her life having been saved, and see how that exists in conflict with the rest of her early history. I would be interested to see how that played out. And maybe there's not much of a story there, but it's it's one of the stories that I wanted instead of the one I got.
Yeah, I feel like there were elements that Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner added in here that as I watched the film, I'm like, well, what are we gleaning from this over in the context of the story? Like when she's, again, such a naive young girl, and I find that sense of innocence really refreshing. And I really enjoyed that with Betty. She has that moment where early on, she first is in New York and she's walking around and that guy says, hey, I'm looking for my friends are going to go to this dance and I don't have anyone to go with. Any interest in going with me? And she's like, well, I suppose I do like dancing. And they get her in the car and he seems all nice. And then more guys get in the car. And then it turns out they're going to take her out to the country and rape her. And, but then I'm like, but where did that go? Like, I wasn't sure.
Well, it went nowhere, Andy.
What they were trying to say with, yeah, well, exactly. That's the problem is it's like a moment of her getting forced into a sexual situation. We also have that moment with her dad earlier, alluding to the fact that he is molesting her. But then she still is naive. And when it comes into this world of taking these pictures and stuff, it's like, it's not even explored as a moment of like female empowerment. It's just her like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Let's take some pictures. And it just constantly was frustrating to me. Like, well, why are those things in here if it's not leading to, I'm going to take back my femininity type of story, and I don't know. I guess I struggled with all of that. And and leading into the flashbacks, like I wasn't sure where the benefit was of having some of these moments as flashbacks in this structure, which has become such a standard biopic element of starting at a big point later in the story when the shop's getting busted and the trial and all of that, leading us to her life, and then we're kind of walking through it, which just seems like there's no good reason to do that other than to allow us to have like a titillating moment of conflict at the start of the story that can allow kind of for this structure to happen. And it just, I don't know, all of these things, like I just don't feel like this was a case of a director and her co-writer finding the heart of the right story.
I think that's true. I think to your point about the child abuse and the rape sequence, they're not presented in any sort of fashion that makes it feel unified as pieces of her character moving forward. They really are presented as moments, and that's what the whole movie is. It is a string of disconnected, disjointed moments that don't paint a picture of character, and I think that's what I'm missing. I don't even know that. That bit with her father is so fast. It's such a small scene, a small disconnected scene. We have no other sort of instruments available to us as audience members to understand her relationship with the rest of her family. It almost could be another character, right? It could be, so you might not even think it's Betty it moves so quickly through it.
Well, and it leads to this place where all I'm left to think about is Mary Harron and Guinevere Turner, are they putting those scenes in here because they're saying things that happen in a life like this can lead to you getting into porn? Like, I don't understand why they're there if they're not going to just be an element. And so that either that, these are the things that lead a person into the life of pornography, which is such an odd kind of path for them to be taking the story, or it's just these are key points in Betty's life and we're going to put them in the film because.
Well, right, and the whole perspective, and the anchor characters that we have to present the other side of that argument are the photographers, some of the photographers, where we have the nice young man and who's part of the photo club, and he takes her out into the woods. This is the first time she gets fully nude, and he says, I can't shoot that. I'll be arrested. I need you to turn around, and then we have, of course, Sarah Paulson's Bunny Yeager, who I think is fantastic. I mean, I love Sarah Paulson. The way this is, I think this is supposed to be the presentation of art versus pornography, right? We have a strong woman photographer who is taking pictures of Bettie Page, topless, nude, whatever, but doing it. But obviously, she can't be titillated by it because she's a woman, right? Like that's kind of the air quotes perspective I feel like I'm getting from this movie. And so she must be representative of art in human form. And the other side is the photographer's gaggle in the living room and going out into the woods. We know we're taking those pictures because they are titillating, and we have to, beware of just going so far and not too far, and those and eventually we get to she's wearing a leather corset and ball gag and standing on somebody's back in high heels.
Yeah.
And so I think that is it's such a transparent attempt at hitting both sides of that argument that it loses the depth of the performances that I think are otherwise pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. I mean, there are good performances in the film. It's not just Gretchen Mol. I mean, there are other people doing good performances in the film. But it's like, I'm not sure where they're going with this. And I think that your point about the different ways that these different photographers are viewing this as art, that an appreciation of the female form, and then it gets into catering to specific tastes, things like that, because it's a business and they need to make money, and kind of going down this road. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't feel like it's leading us on a path where I feel like they're saying anything, or maybe they're saying too many things, and because of that, it's impossible to kind of pin anything down.
Well, or they're saying just the right thing in an incredibly non-committal way.
Yeah.
I really, this movie feels deflated, and it sucks because I think, again, Gretchen Mol, this is a brave part to take on, right? It is always a brave part to do this kind of just unprotected I was about to say frivolous, but this sort of unprotected flamboyance of nudity in film, right? To live on
an innocence of nudity,
in the sense of nudity of her being nude in film. It is a bold and a brave, courageous effort on her part as a performer, and I just so wish it had ended up being a better movie.
And I mean, going back to your point about the way that kind of the photographers were and everything, it's obvious that it was specifically focused. Their point was specifically focused on the pornography and that angle, and kind of like the way that the government was shifting into attack mode because of it in the culture wars, as you mentioned earlier, because that's how they frame it, right? That's exactly the piece they use at the start of the film to say, this is what our story's going to be about. It's about the horrors of the rise of pornography in the 50s, but in reality, how it's not necessarily as bad as all that. That's basically what they're trying to frame it with. So that has to be the message that they're trying to get across. And I think that it wasn't a strong message. They could have found a better way to do it. It just largely doesn't work.
Yeah. You don't put a guy like Chris Bauer in that role if you don't want him to be the cultural bad guy, right? If you don't want that part to be like, they're really hanging a sign on him doing that role, and the way he did it, like he's the lovable schlub, and nobody can ever look at anything. If you only knew the guy, you'd know that he wasn't really up to no good. And in fact, the way he plays it, he's a lovable schlub, and he doesn't even know he's up to no good, right? He just wants his business to keep going. He wants his little mail order business to keep going, and he gets in trouble. But he also rides that line between painting him as this kind of, he's a lovable schlub, but also he's a schlub and kind of sweaty. And like, he's a guy, when you put him in court with all the nice suits, he's going to stand out. And that just feels like such a heavy-handed way to portray this character. It just felt like it was trying to hide complexity behind, behind something so obvious. I did think it was interesting the way they portray this is it's sort of the Al Capone story, right? Where they get Al Capone on tax evasion and they get pornographers for, mail fraud or mail, whatever the ultimate, sending porn through the mail system. I think that was interesting. I think that was
I didn't realize that was the way that they're kind of initially the attack on porn was to stop them by not allowing, or by saying you're mailing these things through the U.S. postal system and that's not allowed and now you're in trouble from it. It's like, oh, interesting. I didn't realize that was a thing, but I appreciate that little bit of history that I've learned from this. So there were elements.
Do you find yourself saying that to the movie when it's over?
I do. Yeah.
I appreciate you for that little bit of history, movie.
Absolutely. And I don't know. I guess as this is the last of our Mary Harron series, I will say I was a little disappointed that she went back to the biopic well. I mean, I thought she did fine with I Shot Andy Warhol, but I thought she did so much better with American Psycho, and I wanted to see her do something that was edgy again. And even in the sense of biopic, like every step of the way, this felt like safe. Like all the decisions they were making were ones of safety. And I don't know if she was just trying to, because Bettie Page was still alive. They couldn't get her to sign off on the film because I guess she had actually already committed to a different project. I think there was a documentary that was being made that she was a part of, I think. And so she couldn't actually commit to it. She, Mary Harron did get interviews with friends and family and her first husband and people like that. But maybe she was just trying to play it safe because she didn't want to offend Betty, and it just feels
sure
like
what it felt like. Yeah,
it felt very soft. I mean, you used that word right at the beginning, and I think that's really just how it feels.
It also in its sort of playing it safe, it also manages to do the double sins of, and I didn't even think about this until I just read your note that drove me batty. So we already have the flashback, which is not useful in this film. I think we agree. And the second is the voiceover as she's reading the letters to her sister Goldie, which I thought, again, I get that they're trying to make this family connection, but the family connection was already too weak, and I hate the voiceover so much.
Yeah, it was badly written. It wasn't interesting, and it just felt like we need to have some exposition in here to get us from this point to that point. Let's have her write a letter to her sister. And there were just, I don't know. I often give biopics a lot of benefit of the doubt as I watch them because I know it's about a story about a person's life, and some of the tropes that they fall into to kind of get the story told. I'm like, well, they're trying to tell a person's life. It's going to need elements like that to kind of get me through it. As long as I'm really interested in the person and their life, generally that stuff kind of rolls off my back. But here, I just like all of these things just kept compiling on top of each other to a point where I'm like, oh my God, now we're going to have like some poorly written narration as a letter to her sister to get us there. It's like, gosh, come on. This is frustrating.
So some interesting production choices. She shoots most of the film in black and white. And when she gets to Miami, it's in color. How'd the color change work for you?
It gets to Miami, but also was it consistent? Because I feel like the first time that we flashed to color was in a photo shoot, right? Like as soon as we started with the first round of magazines, I think after one of her first big photo sessions, all of a sudden everything was in color. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we're going to have a black and white film, and then it's going to shift to color when it's going into a lot of these like magazines and stuff. And it's like, this is the photo world of Betty or something like that. But then it really seemed to shift to Miami. And I'm like, oh, okay. So all of a sudden now it's very specifically Miami when we're in color, like all the stuff with Sarah Paulson. She meets that guy down there, all that stuff. Now everything's in color. But then even at the end, like she is, she's with her long-term boyfriend, I guess, or husband. I'm not exactly sure who he was, up in New York, leaves him, goes back to Florida. She's hanging out with that boy on the beach that she had met, leaves him, finds church, and is saved, all in color. Then we see her changing clothes again, back in black and white. Then we're back in color as she's on the street corners preaching the word of the Lord. And so I'm like, are we in Miami still? Like,
you're right. That's really interesting. I had missed the part where they go to the film shoot. It's the first film shoot where they're all playing croquet and they're bopping around. That's not in Miami, and it's all in color.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's at 45 minutes, and I had totally missed that because it seemed like, and I'm sure I was implanted by reading when she talks about choosing to film the stuff in Miami in color.
Right. Yeah.
But then why did they choose to film the earliest film shoot of her in color as well? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then why was there, like, if she's in Florida through the whole end, why do we dip to black and white at one point when she's changing her clothes, only to come back to color when she's, on the street corner and stuff? Like, I just found a little consistency with that. And I wasn't sure. I mean, and I guess it's harder when I read that note about Miami, because Mary Harron said she knew all the Miami scenes she wanted to be in color to provide a contrast between Betty's professional life and the escape she ultimately made from it. But then there's a lot of stuff in Miami that is part of her professional life, everything she's doing with Bunny. And
that's all color.
That's all color. And so that's like, I don't know. I guess I struggle with Harron's decision because I don't feel like Miami defined the difference between professional life and her escape. I feel like, if she was going to do that, she should have found a different way around it. Like all the stuff when she was a kid should have also been in color then, right? Like,
yeah. When she was still innocent and before, but then when she switches back to finding God is all in color. Anything in church is in color at the end, right? When she goes back to church and she sees the choir, it's all in this beautiful, luscious color.
Yeah.
And so that seems to be yet another possible rule set that she's following that doesn't seem consistent.
And then, like I said, she's saved in color. The next scene, she's changing her clothes. It's back in black and white. And then she's outside in color. It's like, well, why the one bit in, like, is that Mary Harron saying this is her taking off the shell of her old life? And like, I don't know. It was a frustrating.
Right. That is so strange.
It was strange.
She's putting on her clothes of being found, like it's her Prudence outfit, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly. So why isn't it in color?
Are we supposed to believe that this end sequence is her actually figuring out that what she did has questions of prurience?
Well, that was my question earlier. It's like, that guy has that thing where he says, "Oh, you should see what they're doing nowadays. The stuff you did was tame." Like, okay, was this a point we're making here?
Because if anyone's going to get that point,
did we just go into Boogie Nights territory? Like, now we're in video.
Yeah, exactly. It's not Bettie Page.
Yeah, right.
She'll never figure it out. So okay.
Yeah, it's I don't know. The whole thing was just very frustratingly put together, and I just don't feel, as a director, that Mary Harron found the way into the story.
I would not have been able to tell you that this was a Mary Harron film without some guidance. It just felt like it just acquiesced too easily in many choices, in terms of the director's stamp, in terms of her ability to make hard choices around the kinds of things she wants to show on screen. I don't feel like. I either feel like she abdicated the easiest choice every time or didn't make choices at all.
It feels, barring the nudity, and I mean, again, I appreciate that they painted it in such an innocent light, the way that Gretchen Mol kind of plays all of that. I found that to be refreshing and innocent, and I enjoyed that. But everything else about it felt like I was watching like a Hallmark biopic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did it? I don't remember. I mean, I hadn't seen the film, and I don't remember how it was released originally. It's an HBO Films, right?
It is, but they were releasing a lot of things theatrically.
Theatrically too? Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if this was one of their specials.
No, it was an indie film. I think, I don't know if they put some money into it, but
interesting.
Yeah, it was a relatively small indie budget.
Guinevere Turner was supposed to take on the role of Bettie Page, and I feel like before we started talking about Mary Harron, I didn't know much of Guinevere Turner. Boy, I think she does look the part. I think she already has kind of the natural dark hair, the natural sort of look of Bettie Page. I think she could have pulled it off, but looks like they couldn't get the money.
I don't think she was a name. I mean, she had been one of the prostitutes in American Psycho, and she had been kind of an indie actress since the early mid 90s, but always in kind of small parts. Like, she never was somebody who really kind of grew into the it girl, and so I think because of that, it's like they were pushing the story to be the next or Guinevere Turner's chance at the lead role and stuff. But yeah, it's just like you're not going to get it without or the funding that you need to make a movie like this without somebody who's at least a little bit more of a name. And so I mean, she definitely looks the part. I think she could have been fine, because I do think that in the scenes she was in American Psycho, I thought she was fine. But I mean, as you said, Gretchen Mol just really owned this role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else stand out? Because there are a lot of performers in here that I think are worth just running down the names.
Well, certainly we have some faces we've seen in previous films: Jared Harris and Lily Taylor from the first film in the series, and Cara Seymour. She had been the other prostitute in American Psycho.
Love Jared Harris in kind of a weird role, but I just love seeing him. That guy has got some range.
Yeah, he does. He's so much fun to see here, and he definitely feels like it almost felt like he's channeling a little bit of the world of Andy Warhol again with his kind of crazy character here.
Absolutely. John Cullum, was fun to see John Cullum in Nashville briefly.
Yep, it was nice seeing him. I loved seeing Austin Pendleton as her theater teacher, and I thought that was just is an acting teacher, and I just thought that was very funny, like the interpretation that she took for that read, and how she was like taking her pantyhose off and all this stuff, and he's just like, okay, good.
Yep.
You can see
don't have
very
to
much
take your clothes off, dear.
Yeah, exactly. Very 50s mentality. I thought that was pretty funny.
What stinks about that is that was a scene I wanted to see play out. Like, I would really be interested in seeing what Bettie Page could do with that. Like, what was she really? How was she wasn't going to strip? Like, she was just home at the end of the day, just sitting for 2 minutes.
Right.
And he was, just as a vessel of, rudeness. Austin Pendleton was fantastic, but I wish I'd seen kind of where that would play out. There's another version of that scene in my head that works in the movie better, where we get to see what Bettie Page is capable of.
Exactly.
David Strathairn as Estes Kefauver, Senator Estes Kefauver.
But we already know Strathairn works great in black and white. Let me just go see
Good Night,
Good Night and Good Luck, and you know what we're talking about. But I mean, he's great here. It's just, it felt again like they pulled all of their actual dialogue for the scene from the Senate hearing itself. Mm-hmm. And so there's not much original to it. It's just, we're watching a Senate hearing. It played out that way too.
And Norman Reedus. I was very excited to see Norman Reedus in this movie. I wish he was a nicer guy, but not surprised that he wasn't.
Yeah.
Brief first husband of Bettie Page. And, he went from here straight into Walking Dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was great seeing him again. He's a part of kind of like a poorly scripted part of the film where they have a meet cute, and then it's like, montage. It's like marriage / abuse / divorce montage, and that's pretty much what we're left with as far as his relationship and part in the film.
Anybody else jump out at you? It's a long long, lovely cast, but those were the ones that hit me.
Again, just, a lot of good names. Ann Dowd was the mom, and she, I thought, was fine as kind of the religious mom. I thought they were all, the cast, I think they worked. I think, again, they all do their job in the context of the film.
W. Mott Hupful III behind the camera, I think working with Tricia Cook, editing, they found an interesting look for the film throughout. Whatever we think of their decisions to move between black and white and color, I think integrating this film, this period, with, stock footage of the period, stock colors of the period, I think works beautifully.
It does. I liked the film stock they used for the color was a grainier film stock, so it felt of the period. My only complaint is when they had all that beautiful stock footage throughout of kind of the cities and stuff to really establish the era. I loved all of that. I couldn't help but wish that they, and I know it would have been hard for the full film, but using a more grainy black and white film stock today to kind of at least match with the black and white more. I know they probably didn't want the whole thing to be quite so grainy, but
that's really grainy. Like that really jumps out. Can I just imagine watching a whole thing like that? I'd turn that off.
Well, I know
the highlights are all blown out.
Even just a little bit of grain. It just, like when we went to the black and white, the actual film photography, it felt so clean, so pristine.
Yeah,
like I could have just used a tiny hint of it or something,
But you pause. I happened to pause on some of the stock, and there were. Like you could see all of the unfixed dust and string, like thread elements on the film that hadn't been cleaned up. I was surprised that they didn't clean that up just a little bit better, and because that would have also matched better to the modern stock. And to your point, I actually think they did a fine job for the time we spend with the film, with our eyes on the film. I think it would have been visually exhausting to watch the whole film dirtied up. So
I'm sure it would have. I'm just saying.
But you're right. The color was perfect. I mean, the color was, I think, really great.
I actually worked with Mott Hupful. His very next film, The Savages.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I can't say I worked with him.
Do you dine with Mott Hupful?
But
does one get beverages with Mott Hupful?
We were in the room together from time to time over the course of our tiny little portion of that project.
I have the chills. Little hairs are standing up on the back of my neck. Costumes were lovely. We talk about a period film, got to talk about the costumes. I actually think they did a great job with the costumes. This is John Dunn behind costumes. And I think they went to some lengths to, make sure that they had period costumes, especially the undergarments, the corsets, the heels, all of that stuff, I think was really great.
Yeah, like they actually... for the first like big pinup session that she did in kind of her black leather with those boots that go up to her knees, like they had those custom made for this because they wanted to get them just right. Those, I think they call them Betty boots. And they really wanted to make them look right. And it's just like everything just looked so authentic and real. Like you look at photos of Bettie Page and you look at what they were recreating here. And I'm like, they really did a great job of capturing all of that. And this, you're right. I mean, this is the sort of film that highlights what the costume designer can do for a project. And I mean, if there's anything that I would say awards recognition wise would have been nice to see a little more of, was recognition in the costumes department.
Production design, absolutely. I'm not saying anything of anything, but if you were to do a little search of the Playboy centerfold Bettie Page picture, you would see it recreated in this movie. It's the wink hanging the ornament on the Christmas tree. And I just think that they nailed the production of that scene when she's sitting on her knees and she's hanging things. Just how about give us a little wink, snap, perfect. And that's the shot that they had ended up using in the original Playboy. So.
Yeah, one of the very first Playboys. Like she was one of the first of the centerfolds. So.
Okay, Mark Suozzo behind the music.
Mark Suozzo is not a big documentary composer. That is largely where Mark does his work. 23 documentary credits up to this point. His feature film music is much smaller, only 10 credits. Started doing the stuff with Whit Stillman, so always was kind of in the indie scene as far as film composing goes, and only really did films for about 20 years. His last film was 2011. damsels in distress. Otherwise, it really is focusing on documentaries.
What's funny is one of the films that I really enjoy, one of his IMDb top 4 is American Splendor, and I would not have been able to tell you who did the music on that at all. It never really noticed, and I don't really remember, but I'm sure it was great.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was fine in this film, and nothing stood out as like really great. I guess part of me also feels the music felt a little Hallmarkish.
Yeah, I worry about that. I worry that I think the music, like going back and listening to clips, the music fits so well with a non-committal, unopinionated film.
Yeah,
the music is non-committal and unopinionated.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where we're left.
Yeah. All right. So Bettie Page, obviously, as much as she was portrayed here as kind of a boring character, there sure were some other things, other projects related to Bettie Page out there. If you're so curious, if you like this one, or if you don't, you might be curious to go look at some other ones.
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting work out there. I mean, there is a direct-to-DVD biography, I guess, a biofilm, not really it is very much a documentary about her called Bettie Page, Dark Angel, that really focuses on her time with the Claws, and it's kind of that period of her life. In 2012, there was a film called Bettie Page Reveals All, and this was the authorized biographical documentary that I think that she had been committed to back when this film was going, because they did a lot of interviews with her. She died in 2008. They had done a bunch of different interviews with her, plus a lot of other people in her life. And so those are some biographies to pick out. Other than that, I mean, she fell out of favor for a very long time. And then in the 80s kind of had this revival, this rediscovery of her. And it kind of turned into this thing where like she really turned into like somebody in pop culture that people would reference and point out. And that's where probably I first heard of her, because like from different types of clothing. I think Christian Dior has patterned stuff off of styles that she wore. And you look at film, this is something I didn't know. Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. There's a droid called the BD-3000 Luxury Droid that was inspired by Bettie Page. Also, Rosario Dawson's character in Death Proof, Quentin Tarantino's film, she was designed with that haircut to look like Page. There's comic books like Poison Ivy. There was a point where she was designed to look like her. Different other comics. There was actually some Bettie Page comics. Other books had stuff. Orange is the New Black. Video games, music. Even in astronomy, there is a planet that is named for Bettie Page. So clearly, there is something about what she was a part of and how she, even unwittingly, however it came out, she ended up representing this element of the period. And I think that's what people gravitate to. And to that end, I guess the film does kind of depict like this is this woman who became known as, somebody who is in these images that are iconic now.
Wow. Fascinating. I have seen nothing else of Bettie Page besides really this film. And like you said in the beginning, being aware of her, learned a lot. I can't say that this movie necessarily inspired me to want to dig in and watch more Bettie Page stuff.
No, but, at least I know you've seen Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
That's right. It does make me want to look up that droid. Because really? Droid?
I know. Very funny.
How to do it award season.
This was a film I think people could feel. People loved Gretchen Mol. That was the thing that really came out in conversation, how great she was. But the film itself felt so lackluster that it didn't get a lot of notice. It had no wins, but it did get 4 nominations at the Alliance of Women Film Journalists. They nominated it for the EDA Special Mention Award for the best depiction of nudity or sexuality. Lost to the film Little Children.
What, pray tell, what's the rubric for that?
I would love to know. But just to give you a perspective, the other nominees were Borat, the first Borat film, Babel, and Sherry Baby.
Wow.
So
okay.
Now you know.
All right, Borat. Got it.
At the Berlin International Film Festival, it was nominated for Best Feature Film, but lost to The Blossoming of Maximus Oliveros. At the Golden Trailer Awards, it was nominated for Most Original Trailer, but lost to Thank You for Smoking. That actually makes me want to go watch both of those trailers now and see.
Yeah, the trailers, sure.
And last but not least, it was nominated for a Satellite Award, Gretchen Mol for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama, but lost to Helen Mirren in The Queen.
Well, that I think you said it. It's missing a whole lot of awards around production design and costumes. That's unfortunate. I think I wouldn't complain about any of these other losses.
Yeah, I mean, even Helen Mirren, I thought, probably gave a better performance in The Queen. I thought she was pretty fantastic in that film. So I'm fine that it had lost these. It's not a film I expected to really get a lot of awards.
Yeah. All right, how to do at the box office.
Well, this was another indie by Marin and another one with no budget online, unfortunately. Other than reading that this film had a low independent-sized budget, there just aren't figures out there, alas. The film did have a limited release starting April 14th, 2006, opposite Scary Movie 4, The Wild, My Brother's Wife, Preaching to the Choir, and some other limited releases, Kinky Boots and Hard Candy. This film really struggled at the box office. It only earned $1.4 million domestically and $363,000 internationally for a total gross in today's dollars of $2.2 million. Again, I just don't have anything else to go with, but I don't think this likely was much of a success for Mary Harron.
Well, maybe next week you'll be able to perform a little bit better.
Maybe. Fingers crossed.
This was a good series. I'm glad we did this series. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about Mary Harron as a filmmaker. Even if I wasn't crazy about this film, I sure enjoyed just watching the trio of films and looking at the kinds of things she's interested in, the kinds of stories she's interested in telling. But to me, my opinion has not changed about American Psycho. It's the standout so far of the work that she's done.
Absolutely. And to that end, though, I will say I haven't seen anything else that she's done after Bettie Page. I mean, she's done some TV work. That's where she's doing a lot of work these days. She's done 2 other features at this point, The Moth Diaries in 2011 and Charlie Says in 2018. So she's really spacing them out quite a bit. And, I don't know. After watching this series, I don't know how inclined I am to jump into these 2.
Yeah, I let's just say it might be interesting down the road to throw in a bonus, but I'm not going to hurry up to fill out this series.
No, yeah.
All right, let's take it to the mat.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel and you'll see all the films we've talked about on this very show. If you swipe up over in your show notes and tap the word Flickchart, it should take you straight to the Flickchart database with this film in it, and you can add it to your list and see how it stands up against ours.
First up, the Notorious Bettie Page, or Il Postino, the postman.
Il Postino.
Il Postino, please. The Notorious Bettie Page, or Rabid.
Rabid,
please. Bettie Page was missing a armpit that could attack people.
Yes.
That's what she needed. The Notorious Bettie Page, or Year of the Dragon. I will take Year of the Dragon.
I know. I saw you coming.
Okay,
Year of the Dragon.
The Notorious Bettie Page, or To the Stars by Hard Ways.
To the Stars by Hard Ways.
To the Stars by Hard Ways. The Notorious Bettie Page, or Apt Pupil.
Interesting. Talk about controversial themes.
Yeah.
My hunch is you're going to be Apt Pupil.
I am.
Yeah, me too.
Apt Pupil it is. The Notorious Bettie Page, or Underworld, Rise of the Lycans.
Underworld, Rise of the Lycans.
Yeah, I'll take Underworld, Rise of the Lycans.
We should say it's all really, most of this is coming down to which movie you would rather watch. This is not,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Although up to this point, I'd say I still think that, they're better films.
They're better movies.
The Notorious Bettie Page, or Ocean's 11, the 1960 original.
I'd watch probably the 1960 original.
I would watch Bettie Page over that one again. I didn't
we're
like that.
We're at I mean it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Is like a game of solitaire an option?
Yeah, right.
I'll give it to you. You
All
can
right,
have
Bettie
it.
Page. The Notorious Bettie Page, or The Women.
The Notorious Bettie Page.
I'll say The Women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You've really come around.
There's a lot more going on in that film.
All right, let's take it to the mat. Let's get to the bottom of the list and then start fighting about it.
That's right. All right, here we go. One, two, three.
Rock.
Scissors.
Crush you.
Bettie Page takes it. The Notorious
I
Bettie Page.
was going to say whip, ball gag, or stiletto.
Yeah, right? The Notorious Bettie Page or Under the Cherry Moon. I know where this is going.
Under the Cherry Moon. Every time it will be Under the Cherry Moon.
Bettie Page.
Here we go.
One, two, three. Scissors.
Paper. Oh, nuts!
I saw where you were going. Bettie Page, of course, is only one spot above it. That puts Bettie Page in spot 498 on our chart. 498 out of 504. It's, pretty low. It's considered a 1% over there.
Well, we should say at Flickchart, on the Flickchart database, only one person has this movie in their top 20. No one has it at number 1. So even that one person doesn't have it at number 1.
Yeah.
And it wins 43% of its matchups. It's, it's not great. Its global ranking is 6125. How'd it do on your personal?
It didn't do very well. It was a tough film to rank because it's just like almost even some of the films that I'm like, it's not that great a film, but I'd watch it over that one because at least it had there were interesting things happening in that particular film.
Yeah, like Under the Cherry Moon, right.
Oh, nice try. 4307 out of 4612. That's a 7% on my chart.
Well, it actually did a little bit better on mine. 1124 out of 1497, and that's 25%. According to the algorithm, if I go over to letterboxd.com/thenextreel, this should be a 1-star film. It's hard to argue with that. I think I could go as high as 2 stars with the Gretchen Mol bump. But it's not really a movie I'm excited to watch again. I think I feel about as opinionated about the movie as maybe the filmmakers had in making it.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I'm pretty disappointed with what they did here. It just felt so expected. Gretchen Mol absolutely is fantastic. I think I'm going to give it a 1.5, no heart. And that entire 1.5 may be all for Gretchen. She can take all of that.
Well, if this was ever a La Vie en Rose film experience for me, like another biopic where the starring performance is exceptional and the rest of the movie is not.
But that film at least is doing something. Like that film I'd watch again and say, okay, there's at least something interesting going on in that film for me to take away from. This film, I just didn't feel it. I feel like I just can't help but feel like the writers never were able to pin down what this story should have been. So it's frustrating.
I will give it a 2-star with the Gretchen Mol bump. And I can't even cheat because I apparently never added La Vie en Rose to my flick chart to see what I gave it. What are you going to do? But so 2 stars, no heart. And all of those 2 stars will be for Gretchen Mol and John Dunn costumes.
Yeah, right. Here.
Oh, and Maud Hupful, because you were in the room where it happened. And, fun camera work, good color.
Even if it was illogical.
Where, pray tell, do we go from here?
We are shifting gears. We're going to be jumping into a new series. We had done Stephen King a while before. We've looked at a number of films that he has have come from his works. This particular series, we're very specifically focusing on the ones that Frank Darabont wrote and directed. We're calling this King a la Darabont. So we are going to be looking at 3 films by Frank Darabont based on Stephen King's films. 3 of, I should say, Frank Darabont's 4 films that he's directed. We're looking at The Shawshank.
That leaves us room for a bonus.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunately Stephen King had nothing to do with The Majestic, as far as I know. But The Shawshank Redemption from 1994, The Green Mile in 1999, and The Mist in 2007.
All right, and do you want to tease a little bit about what we're doing with Shawshank?
Let's just say we have some surprise guests who will be joining
Unprecedented.
us to talk about that particular film.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to do it. Oh, and the movie ends.
Our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andrew.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
We went high, and there aren't very many, so we're a little less than high.
And they're very positive.
They're very positive. That's true.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first? Why don't you go first?
I've got a 4-star by Sunny Riverside, who just has this to say: Mall glows, but its shifting color seems inexplicable.
Oh.
I think
thoughtful.
I can agree. Yeah.
Mine, Zoe Collette writes with a 4-star, starts with a quote that may sound familiar. Adam and Eve were naked in the Garden of Eden. When they sinned, they put clothes on. This is one of those stories, she continues, where I am so glad a woman directed it. Imagine how putrid this could have been with a man behind the camera. Mary Harron continues to amaze me with her films. I love the use of black and white, but the scenes that are in color really stand out, especially the scene where she's photographed by Bunny Yeager, played by Sarah Paulson. That was the definite highlight for me. Prior to watching this, I always wondered how one could go about portraying Bettie Page, but Gretchen Mol truly pulled it off, playing her as innocent and truly deeply religious despite the work that she's in, along with playful, flirty, and sexy. There are some things in the review that I certainly didn't see on screen, but the one thing that stands out to me, Andy, that I am often struck by when we talk about movies with a particularly, I don't want to say necessarily feminist bent, but I'll say that anyway, is that I wonder if I'm missing something, because I walk away from this film wishing that it had been more feminist, and I'm left feeling a little bit empty by that. And I'm sometimes struck by how maybe I'm missing something that surely other people are seeing, because I didn't see it.
Well, it's funny because I had another review that I was going to read that started with a very similar statement. Imagine how abysmal this would have been with a male director. That was Vivian who wrote that. And I was like, oh, I'm going to read that. And then I switched, but I'm glad you did that one, because yeah, that was something I thought was interesting. You know, and you know, it's been talked about for decades now, with probably nearly a century now, with filmmaking being so old. The fact that the whole idea of the male gaze, and I think that certainly is something to be said. I don't know if I don't know if I agree with these people, because I just don't feel like I don't know what Mary Harron was bringing to it. All of that gave it that view. Might
be true, but not for this movie.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled with Mary Harron as a director.
Yeah.
When she's really pushing, I just didn't feel like there was any of that here. So, well.
All right. Thanks, Letterboxd. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchase is made through our links. Give us a small commission at no extra cost to you, and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We covered a lot of great movies that were adapted from other material in Season 10.
Our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals is where listeners can purchase the source material behind all our adapted film discussions. It helps support the show at no extra cost when you buy through our links.
In our foreign language Best Picture nominees series, we looked at several adaptations, including Z, The Postman Il Postino, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Letters from Iwo Jima.
We hit the high seas with In the Heart of the Sea from Nathaniel Philbrick's nonfiction book for our Aquatic Killers series.
Definitely a weaker entry in that series.
I bet the book is better.
Oh, me too.
Member bonus episodes featured adaptations like Gone Girl, The Russia House, Ivanhoe, The Hot Rock, The Big Heat, and Naked Lunch.
Oliver Stone brought not just original stories, but also adaptations like Conan the Barbarian, Scarface, Year of the Dragon, 8 Million Ways to Die, Talk Radio, and Born on the 4th of July.
Mary Harron's disturbingly insightful American Psycho was adapted from the Bret Easton Ellis book.
You like Huey Lewis in the News?
Oh my God, it even has a watermark.
And of course, more Stephen King with The Mist, The Green Mile, and The Shawshank Redemption for our King a la Darabont series.
Find links to all of these books and more adapted films on our Originals page. That's thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports our show.
Get the full list of books that we've talked about and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.